Hi guys, so I thought I'd do something a little different today. I'm doing a review, but today I'm taking a look at the documentary Watch Horror Films, Keep America Strong. I've teased this before in a previous video. I finally got around to watching it. It's a journey into creature features. Features Bob Wilkins, John Stanley, and Bob Shaw. And I'll read the description on the back. It says, for 14 years, 1971 through 1984, Creature Features was one of the most popular TV shows in San Francisco Bay Area television history. Broadcasted from KTVU Channel 2 in Oakland, California, the Saturday night series was hosted by Bob Wilkins for 8 years, followed by John Stanley for another 6. With a mixture of host commentary and classic and also classic horror movies, it still remains a nostalgic memory. Wilkins' wit and unusually droll personality and Stanley's silly interviews and satirical mini-movies are part of Watch Horror Films, Keep America Strong, a film-length documentary journeying back through those years, featuring interviews with Wilkins, Stanley, and other key figures close to the show. So as classic clips, this historic journey illuminates an air television that should never be forgotten. So, I watched the 75-minute version. I think I'm going to fix my phone there. That's better. From 2008. This also includes the 2013 65-minute version. But I figured I'll watch the 2008 version so I hadn't seen this before. Here's some screenshots in the back. You got Bob Wilkins, Bob Shaw, John Stanley. Bob Wilkins again. I think that's when Bob Wilkins is dressed up as Captain Cosmic. Because he did... I've never seen Captain Cosmic, but he did. He was involved in that show as well. And I do have some notes. I'll be taking a look at this. So my eyes divert. You'll know why. This time I took notes and about what stood out to me and what I wanted to talk about, because this covers a lot of ground. I'm not going to talk about everything, but some of the stuff that I thought stood out to me, that I thought was interesting. So so this starts off. You have both intros of when Bob Wilkins hosted the show and John Stanley hosted the show, and that to me, I thought it was a great way to start it, because it shows that they both had their own style of hosting, and and they were edited differently. Bob Wilkins' editing was a bit more standard. It showed clips of the movies. Whereas John Stanley, the way it was edited, had clips of the movies, but also clips from the show. Which I prefer John Stanley's intro. But it's still great to see both of them in there at the beginning. And it kind of gets you, it gets you in the mood of what you're going to see, what you're going to expect kind of thing. And I like that part. It's a great way to start off. And then we have Sally Wilkins. She was Bob Wilkins' wife. I say was because he passed away a few years ago, I think. And she talks about the history of how Bob got involved. He was working behind the scenes at KTVU Channel 2 until he was asked if he wanted to host a show. And he said, sure, why not? And then they had, horror movies that were not being utilized, that were not being watched or put on the air, any kind of thing like that. So, that's basically what that is about, the history of how Bob got involved, how he started the show, kind of thing. And I thought that was interesting because I didn't know that part. I'm not as familiar with the Bob Wilkins era. And to me, it's like, it didn't seem like it was complicated at all for them to get started. They may have had like copyright things they had to deal with. They didn't really talk about that in the documentary, so I don't know if that was something they had to worry about. But anyway, and we do get into Bob Shaw's relationship with Bob Wilkins. He was the editor for Creature Features, and I thought he was an interesting guy. He had a lot to say. His editing and he was on the show, I think, once or twice when Bob Wilkins was hosting. So what he had to do was he had to watch the movies like several hours a day while he was editing the show. And because Bob Wilkins was saying, oh, everybody would love to have his job kind of thing. But that's not really the case. I mean, if you're in Bob Wilkins' shoes, because you have to, some of those movies, I would imagine, are, weren't easy for him to sit through, because the running gag throughout the show was that Bob Wilkins would say it wasn't worth staying up for the movies that were so bad. But people did anyway. And, kind of showed that Wilkins was kidding, but at the same time he's being serious. And, that horror hosts do that nowadays as well. Not as much. It depends on who the host is. And, on their sense of humor as well. As well. And I just said as well, but I suppose it depends on that as well. Yeah, I mean, Bob Shaw, I think I like to meet him, because having done editing myself, maybe we could kind of, give each other tips. I don't know, but he seems like an interesting guy, and I haven't seen him around at conventions, I don't think. Yeah, I mean, he seems friendly, and seems like he and Bob Wilkins had a good relationship, and they got along well. That brings me to the next point, where Bob Shaw and Bob Wilkins, they both talk about when they showed Night of the Living Dead. And that was one of the first times, if not the first time, Night of the Living Dead was showed on TV. And that kind of gets into the censorship aspect, where they were able to show nudity and sex, to a degree, anyway. And I think they had to, censor, because there was a segment for the movie Twins of Evil that they show in the documentary where they had to, censor the breasts. I haven't seen that movie in a while, so I don't really remember it that well. But things like that back then, it seemed like censorship wasn't as strictly enforced as it is today. And to me, I didn't grow up watching creature features, but to me, it would have been quite a thing at that, at a young age, seeing that kind of stuff on TV, I think. And now, to me, it's just, I watch movies with that stuff, often enough to where I'm desensitized to it. I'm not shocked by it, kind of thing. But even then, they still had their boundaries with what they could show and what they couldn't show. And I thought that's, at least they had a little leeway, because it's better than having to completely butcher the movie. And I thought, oh, that's fascinating. That really got my attention, to where that, like I said, things was different back then. And specifically for Night of the Living Dead, when they were talking about that part, Bob Shaw was saying the trowel scene where the woman is, stabbed by her daughter with the trowel, that was 7 or 8 times she was stabbed, and they had to cut it down to 4. So they still had a little leeway there, even though they had to shorten that. And I don't know if I've really seen a cut down version of Night of the Living Dead like that before, maybe once, but I don't remember that specifically, if that was cut down. But it's great that they gave that movie attention, because that's a groundbreaking movie. And Romero's one of my favorite directors. And then we get into another bit with Ernie Fausilius. He worked on Hardware Wars, which is a Star Wars kind of spoof short film he made. And I thought this was... I met him before. He's a great guy. And I enjoyed talking to him when I met him. And he's a very creative individual. And in the documentary, he remembers that Ernie Fausilius was trying to be very formal and serious about introducing his movie, talking about his movie, kind of thing. And Bob Wilkins didn't really want him to do that. They were still formal, but not as formal as Fausilius had to be. There was leeway with that. And I thought that was, you know, it showed that Bob cared more about Wilkins being himself than trying to adhere to some standard that he thought he had to have. And, you know, it's great to know that he was like that. And, you know, he'd rather have people get to the point and, I mean, yeah, say a little about what they're showing kind of thing, but also not beat around the bush. And I'm the kind of person that I don't like it when people beat around the bush either, so I can very much relate to that. I still haven't seen Harbor Wars. I should get around to it. But another aspect about that is that Wilkins was more focused on Fawcetta's talent. Maybe I could just call him Ernie since I met him, but he was more focused on his talent than he was about him being formal and serious. And Fawcett also pointed out that Wilkins, what he learned from him was that he believed in people more than they believed in themselves. Which I don't know too many people that are like that. And, you know, but it shows that Bob was Wilkins, if you will, was a very caring person. And, you know, I hope I'm doing him justice because he did pass away. And I've only met John Stanley. I never got a chance to meet Wilkins, but not to digress, but yeah. And there was another segment which I thought was kind of neat where Bob Wilkins' kids, they're growing up now, Rob and Nancy Wilkins Fitzpatrick. They talk about the Halloween segments on the show. So I think what they were trying to say was that the neighborhood kids would have Halloween costumes distributed amongst themselves, and they would dress up and they would appear on the show. And so Wilkins would ask them about their costumes, and he had a good time with that. And I like that too, because it showed that he cared about kids. He loved kids, and very, like I said, very friendly, likable person. And I mean, yeah, a different approach to the show than John Stanley had, for sure. But still, I mean, nice individual. This was what I got from that. And, you know, and I know those horror hosts today that still, that care about kids, like Savenguli, for example. He very much loves kids, and he caters his show towards them, kind of thing. And I thought there was a great kind of segment where it's kind of a montage where there's like the beginning and endings where Wilkins interviewed William Shatner, George Takei, Buster Crabbe, just to name a few. And I thought that was kind of neat how they had that part. And I like that because, you know, it showed them the young age and those actors of the young age and what they were up to. And I'm not as familiar with Buster Crabbe as I am William Shatner. But still, I mean, I've heard of Kingdom of the Spiders. I'm familiar with that movie, and Shatner talked about that a bit. So that was kind of cool, kind of neat how, you know, that gave me an idea of what he was doing at the time. He was working on Kingdom of the Spiders and some other stuff. So, yeah, well, I think that was like mid-70s, if I'm not mistaken. Probably, something like that. Early mid-70s, something like that. But yeah, you know, and Star Trek and Star Wars were both a big deal about back then. So you even had Gary Kurtz, you know, like I said, William Shatner, George Takei, kind of you know, talking about their Star Trek stuff as well, and Gary Kurtz being involved in Star Wars. You know, it showed that Wilkins very much cared what they were involved in and wanted to give them time of day. And I mean, yeah, I guess he had to, but he wasn't artificial about it. He wasn't superficial about it, I guess you could even say. He was very much interested in what they had to say, and I could tell he was a good listener. And there's not too many people that are like that nowadays, which is kind of a shame. I was going to say something about that. So speaking of Star Wars, there were people that worked for Lucas grew up watching Bob Wilkins and his show, and then they ended up like appearing on there too, which I thought was kind of cool. Like Gary Kurtz, I think even George Lucas did at one point. They didn't show that, but there's a part where his wife talks about Bob driving down to L.A. to meet with George Lucas to work with his company, but Bob turned it down because that would have impacted him and his family and every his life basically, and he didn't want to give up doing creature features. And I thought, well, to me that shows he's a very dedicated individual to doing creature features and doing Captain Cosmic. And I don't know too many people that are like that they're like, once they commit to something, they want to live it out as long as they can, kind of thing. And so I have a lot of good things to say about Wilkins, even though I never met him. I have respect for him, and especially, he's involved in horror, but you can tell he's very much a caring person, and very kind individual as well. And so now I'll get to the John Stanley segment of the show, and I'll wrap this up as soon as I can. So he hosted the show from 1979 to 1984. He had his own style of hosting the show, coming from a creative writing and short film background. They did talk about that in the documentary. And I've seen, I think, pretty much all of his short films. So I'm familiar with his work. And I like that he brought that into the show, because he studied creative writing at SF State, and that led to him being involved with the SF Chronicle, where he did interviews with people such as Christopher Lee, Rodney Dangerfield, who was the guy who did Piranha, Joe Dante, Chuck Norris, people like that they interviewed, and that really helped him to get his foot in the door with the creature features, because he was able to bring those guests into the show. And he was told that he was supposed to have interviews that were 5 minutes, but to him he ended up going around 10 minutes, which I thought was funny. He ended up taking longer than he was supposed to. And I've seen some of the interviews. I'll get into that a little bit later, but you can tell he really took his time to get to know the guests, and he wanted to hear what they had to say. Very much a good listener, like Bob Wilkins. And was I going to say anything else about that? Oh, so speaking of Christopher Lee, there's a bit where John Stanley's wife, Erica, talks about how Christopher Lee walked into the studio, the set, and he said he didn't want to do an interview because of the way the show was, and a very campy kind of out there kind of show to him, is what the impression I got from Erica. But as soon as Christopher Lee saw Ray Bradbury, he changed his mind and ended up doing the interview. So I mean, to me that kind of reiterates the point that John Stanley interviewed all kinds of people that were familiar with the show and familiar with his work. And coming from a short film background, his style, as I said, his style was more campy, because there was a segment in the documentary where it shows him with a gorilla from one of the movies. I forget the name of it, but there's a person in a gorilla costume. John Stanley's dressed up like a safari. He has a pith helmet, the safari clothing in it, and he has a rifle. So he's kind of playing out, a bit in the movie. He's kind of you know, like I said, can be kind of a spoof of the movie itself, and I thought that was kind of funny because I know there's horror hosts that have done that, and it shows that John Stanley style it was influential towards them, you know. So for me, it gave me an idea of where that kind of came from. That I guess you could even say self-referential humor in a way. And so the Creature Features legacy still lives on because books are still being published, DVDs are being put out. Even though the show ended in 1984, John Stanley and everyone else involved, they're not giving up on it because they got me interested. And I didn't even watch the show when it was on, but you know, I've seen bits and pieces of it. You know, and I've seen horror hosted shows such as Svengoolie, Creepy Coffee Movie Time, Mr. Lobo, Cinema Tony, Mr. Lobo. And to me, it shows that, you know, they're not going to quit anytime soon, all those people that were involved in the show. And John Stanley's still staying active, and I don't remember how old he is, but he's semi-retired, I believe, but he's still at it, which is good because it shows that he cares, and there's people like me that are interested and that care very much, and horror hosts, you know, I've been interested in that since I met John Stanley years ago, and you know, it's great to kind of have that, even though you don't really have him doing the show anymore. You know, it's great to show that horror is very much alive and well in that sense with horror hosts and people taking up the reins, like, you know, Lord Bloodrod said, Svengoolie, and doing their own thing, but still kind of remembering their roots as well. And I think that's all I have to say. I've covered this pretty well with what stood out to me. I hope you enjoyed this review. I'm not sure if you can get this Blu-ray anywhere because I got a convention about a year ago. Finally got around to watching it. I know it took me that long, but check it out if you're interested. Especially even if you're vaguely familiar with horror hosts and you want to learn about the history, I'd check this out. I know you can get the DVD from November Fire. And I remember I'd kind of touched on those interviews with Joe Dante, Chuck Norris, all those guys. That DVD set that November Fire has, I'll leave a link in the description, and that has the I Was a TV Horror Host, which is a bunch of interviews that John Stanley had done. And did I mention I already have that DVD? I'm not sure if I did, but I do. I got that when I first met John Stanley. So there's really no reason for me to buy the DVD if I already have the additional, you know, I Was a TV Horror Hosts documentary that it came with. But this is worth getting. Worth checking out. I give it a 9 out of 10. My highest recommendation. I really enjoyed this. And yeah, I'll see you guys in the next video. Be putting this up tonight or tomorrow. And have a good one. Thanks for watching.